On a warm September night in New York, a Grand Slam final turned into a referendum on the rulebook itself. In the 2018 U.S. Open women's final between Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka, a cascade of code violations moved from a single warning to a full game penalty, reshaping not just the match, but the careers and reputations of everyone involved. The chair umpire did not invent any new rules that night. He applied existing regulations on coaching, racket abuse, and verbal abuse exactly as the written code allowed him to. Yet by the time Osaka lifted her first major trophy, the story of the final was no longer her tennis, but 3 lines in a rulebook, and how one official chose to enforce them in the most high-stakes moment possible. You are not supposed to feel the rulebook in a tennis match. When it is working, it functions like the lines on a court, framing the competition but never becoming the main character. In women's tennis over the past decade, that frame has cracked in public. A chair umpire's discretion, a vague medical timeout rule, or an ambiguous time limit clause has repeatedly stepped out of the shadows and onto center court. The WTA's regulations promise consistency, transparency, and protection for players, but in practice, those same pages have helped create some of the most controversial moments of the modern era. When we talk about the WTA rulebook changing careers, we are really talking about how small, seemingly technical decisions can tilt momentum, rewrite legacies, and permanently change how players are perceived. To understand how this happens, you have to start with what the Code of Conduct actually allows. At professional events governed by WTA regulations and Grand Slam rulebooks, umpires have a clear escalation ladder. A first code violation brings a warning, a second becomes an automatic point penalty, and a third can escalate to a full game penalty, with the nuclear option of a default always available in extreme cases. The infractions themselves range from on-court coaching to racket abuse, from audible obscenities to verbal abuse of officials. On paper, the logic is clean. Players know that emotional outbursts or repeated arguments can carry a direct competitive cost. In reality, that structure gives enormous power to individual umpires in the heat of a match. 2 identical outbursts can be treated very differently depending on who is in the chair, what round it is, and who is standing across the net. The 2018 U.S. Open final is the clearest example of how that power can collide with the player's entire public identity. Early in the second set, Serena Williams received a first code violation for coaching after the umpire judged signals from her box to be instruction, even though coaching from the stands is technically banned at Grand Slams. She insisted she never cheats and demanded the warning be rescinded, but the rulebook gives the umpire complete authority to interpret visible coaching attempts as a violation, regardless of the player's intent. Later, after dropping a game and smashing her racket in frustration, she was given a second code violation for racket abuse, triggering the automatic point penalty that started Osaka's next game at 15-love. When she continued arguing and called the umpire a thief, it was recorded as verbal abuse. Under the code, that third violation meant a full game penalty, pushing Osaka ahead 5-3 and effectively breaking the match open. What made this sequence career-altering was not just the scoreline. Serena Williams, already a global icon, suddenly found herself portrayed in some corners as an aggressor who had lost control, and in others as a victim of sexism and double standards in rule enforcement. She was fined thousands of dollars for the violations, small change compared to her career earnings, but a permanent line in her disciplinary history. For Osaka, her first major title arrived wrapped in boos, confusion, and tears, as the ceremony tried to reconcile a historic victory with the fallout of the penalties. Osaka's breakthrough should have been a clean coronation. Instead, the images most people remember involve her apologizing to the crowd and hiding under her visor as Serena tried to calm the stadium. A single string of code violations, all technically allowed by the rulebook, had rewritten the emotional narrative of 2 careers in one evening. This is the first way the WTA rulebook changes careers, by turning the umpire's interpretation into a plot twist that no coach can game plan around. Players build their reputations over years of training and thousands of points. One disputed call, one unusually strict enforcement of coaching rules can snap all of that into a viral controversy. Even when fines are modest, the reputational damage is not. The record will always show Williams as having received 3 code violations in that final, including one for verbal abuse. The nuance of her arguments about sexism, the comparison she made to male players who have said worse with fewer consequences, is not recorded in the rulebook's language. The system documents infractions, it does not document context. If code violations show how rules can explode in a single night, medical timeouts reveal a slower, more structural form of damage. Under WTA and Grand Slam regulations, players are allowed limited medical timeouts with a defined time cap, usually 6 minutes for evaluation and treatment if 2 separate medical conditions are involved. That seems straightforward until you try to apply it in real time, with the player under pressure and a stadium waiting. In the 2013 Australian Open semifinal, Victoria Azarenka left the court for what became roughly a 10-minute break while leading Sloane Stephens and struggling to close out the match. The official explanation referenced treatment for separate rib and knee issues, which on paper would justify consecutive timeouts. But television interviews and Azarenka's own comments immediately after the match initially emphasized nerves and breathing difficulty, not a clearly diagnosed injury. That gap between what the rule allows and how players describe the moment triggered a wave of criticism and forced the WTA to announce a review of its medical timeout procedures. Commentators call the incident an example of gamesmanship, a strategic pause disguised as treatment made possible by a rulebook that was both generous and vague. Under the existing language, officials could have issued a warning, a point penalty, or even a default if they believed the time limit had been exceeded without valid medical justification. None of that happened. Azarenka went on to win the match and then the tournament. For Stephens, the timing of the break, coming just as she had saved match points and was gaining momentum, became a kind of career ghost story. The night a comeback chance was cooled down not by a rival's shot-making, but by an ambiguous line in the regulations. The impact of that decision goes beyond one semifinal. Once viewers see a top player leave the court for close to 10 minutes at a critical juncture with no penalty, it recalibrates what fans and peers think is acceptable. Every subsequent medical timeout by a leading player now draws suspicion. Is this genuine injury management or simply a tactical reset? For younger players like Stephens at the time, the message is brutal. You can do everything right, build pressure honestly through your tennis, and still watch it evaporate in a corridor off court. The rulebook's failure to define and enforce hard limits did not just influence one match, it helped normalize a form of gamesmanship that can linger as a stigma around certain names. Time-related rules have become another fault line where careers bend. Modern WTA and joint regulations spell out strict limits, 25 seconds between points, specific durations for changeovers, and tightly defined windows for toilet breaks and clothing changes. A dedicated procedure document even sets one authorized toilet break per player in singles, only at set breaks or before a player's own serve, with 3 minutes inside the facility and a small additional allowance for changing. Violations can trigger back-to-back time penalties until the player returns, meaning a warning followed by immediate point penalties if the delay continues. In practice, it creates another arena where interpretation and enforcement can escalate into public drama. Veteran players who push these time edges acquire reputations that follow them from tournament to tournament. Opponents speak openly about dark arts and rhythm disruption. And even when no formal violation is issued, careers can be defined as much by how someone uses or abuses the clock as by their forehand technique. For rising players on the WTA Tour, learning the exact contours of toilet break rules and time violation procedures is now part of the survival kit. Misjudging the distance to a locker room or the pace of a medical evaluation can cost them precious points in tight matches. Meanwhile, those who master the margins turn the rulebook into a weapon, stretching every allowance without breaking it, and in the process, forcing the tour to repeatedly rewrite procedures, The document that should guarantee fairness becomes a living record of who managed to bend it furthest. What links the code violations of a Serena Williams, the long medical timeout of a Victoria Azarenka, and the carefully calibrated toilet breaks sprinkled across modern matches is not just controversy, but governance. In each case, the WTA's own framework collides with the separate sovereignty of Grand Slams and local organizers. Major events can adopt and interpret rules differently from the tour, leaving players caught between overlapping legal systems. One set of officials emphasizes strict enforcement in a U.S. Open final, while another set effectively looks away during a 10-minute timeout in Melbourne. From the outside, it looks like chaos. From the inside, it feels like a career risk that cannot be forecast, because the same behavior can produce a fine, a game penalty, or nothing, depending on the logo on the court and the nameplate on the umpire's chair. The cost of that chaos is measured not only in ranking points and prize money, but in trust. When players complain that rules are enforced differently across genders, tournaments, and personalities, they are really saying that their livelihoods depend on a system that cannot promise consistent application of its own standards. Serena Williams left New York feeling that male players would have been given more leeway for similar arguments. Sloane Stephens left Melbourne having learned that a rival could spend almost 10 minutes off court at a pivotal moment without sanction. Younger stars watching these episodes internalize a harsh lesson. They must not only beat opponents, but also forecast how an invisible matrix of officials, supervisors, and vague clauses might tilt a match. In theory, a rulebook is a neutral document. In women's tennis, it has become an instrument that can decide who gets a clean breakthrough moment and who ends up in a viral controversy that clings to their name for years. The WTA's promise to review procedures after high-profile incidents shows an awareness that something is broken, but reviews and statements do not erase what already happened to the players whose careers were rerouted in real time. Every time a code violation escalates into a game penalty on the biggest stage, every time a medical timeout stretches beyond what seems reasonable, another layer of doubt is added to the system. Until the various governing bodies align their interpretations and narrow the gray areas, the most consistent winner in these controversies will not be a player, but the rulebook itself. It will continue to step onto the court uninvited and change careers in ways that no ranking algorithm or training block can predict.